He stood up in the middle of my award speech. The room went still. And my father said, "This was a restricted gift." Even though the MC had just called it an unrestricted pledge. The foundation controlled the money. The program carried my name. And I could neither undo the donor, nor stop his story from spreading. He wanted the spotlight and my silence. But that one wrong word, restricted, would lead me back to the paper that could undo him. The lights were warm and high, making the tablecloths look brighter than they were. Crystal chimed when someone set a glass down too quickly. I kept my hands flat on my skirt to stop them from shaking. The MC had introduced me as a teacher who stayed late with the last student, and a researcher who wrote grants in the quiet after everyone went home. I smiled because that part was true. Then she read the gift line from the card. A $2 million unrestricted pledge supporting first-generation scholars. She said the name of the corporate donor. A name I have avoided most of my adult life because it sits on my father's business cards. Before the applause reached the back of the room, he scraped his chair and stood. His jaw worked. He walked out with my mother behind him, her face blank, as if she were easing past a stranger in a narrow aisle. I waited to breathe until the MC reached the end of her script. She squeezed my arm on the way off stage and whispered, "You were wonderful," which meant she had seen everything and could change nothing. I followed the path behind the stage to the hallway, by the coat check where the carpet softened every step. My mother stood near the door, both hands on her clutch. When she looked at me, it was the glance you give someone who has taken a seat that wasn't theirs. "You should have told us," she said softly. "You know how your father feels about surprises." "It wasn't my surprise," I said. "The foundation planned it." She pressed her lips together and looked away. "You know he hates when people use his name to look generous." "He used his own name," I said. She flinched. My father pushed through the exit and stood under the portico, where the night air felt like clean glass. He didn't look at me first. He looked at the valet stand, at the red rope, at the street. Then he turned. "I'm not here to bankroll your narrative," he said. "That money was restricted. They know that." The word landed like a coin on a tabletop, sharp, wrong, unmistakable. The MC had said unrestricted because the foundation had told her so on the card. And the foundation used that word because it came from the signed pledge letter they keep in a drawer. I kept my face still. He took my silence for submission, nodded once, and stepped toward the curb, where the valet had already pulled up his car. My mother followed without turning back. Their door closed with a soft, expensive sound. I stood there a moment longer, watching the traffic lights change down the block. The night smelled like damp stone and orchid corsages. A bus sighed and moved. I went back inside, past donors who smiled at my shoulder rather than at my eyes. The MC touched her earpiece and met me by the green room. "Do you want to skip the last photo set?" she asked. Her voice was kind, worn from years of making programs sound smooth when they were not. "I'll finish," I said. We posed with 3 groups of students who reminded me of the late bus rides I used to take home from the library. They stood straight and tried not to blink when the light flashed. After the last one, I excused myself to the restroom and gripped the edge of the sink until the metal cooled my palms. In the mirror, the woman who looked back had my eyes and my aunt's jaw. I felt tired and clean, as if something in me had decided that clarity was a form of rest. When I came out, Aunt Lydia was waiting by the bench under the painting of the lake. She had taken off her heels and set them side by side on the carpet, toes pointed straight, the way she lines up silverware when she dries dishes. She gave me a look that said she had seen 100 family dinners go sideways and had survived them all. "You don't have to go back in," she said. "I'm fine," I said. And then I told the truth. "I'm angry." "That's a good sign," she said. "Use it slow." She handed me a small envelope with the foundation's seal pressed into the flap. "The coordinator asked me to pass this to you on your way out," she said. "A little housekeeping." Inside was a printed program and a note in tidy blue pen, MC's final script. Approved 442p. M. by Donor Relations. Language confirmed unrestricted pledge. On the back was a voicemail transcription from the coordinator I'd worked with all month, while we selected photos of students and checked the font sizes on slides. Hi. Just confirming for your remarks, it's an unrestricted pledge. No, special conditions. So talk from the heart. The transcript had a timestamp and a file ID. I could hear her voice in my head. The cheerful efficiency. The way she had once said, "You always reply with complete sentences. Thank you." I tucked the note into my clutch and exhaled through my nose. "I'm going to ask for a copy of the pledge letter." I said. "You'll get it," Lydia said. "But you won't need to raise your voice." We walked down the hallway and out into the cool night. The parking lot lights made precise circles on the asphalt. Somewhere nearby, a band started a second set, the drum beat carrying through the trees. Lydia drove me home in her sensible sedan that has lived through 2 new sets of tires and the same air freshener clipped to the vent. She didn't turn on the radio. We had driven like this when I was 19, and she filled a trunk with my laundry and textbooks after my father told me to leave. She had folded each t-shirt and slid it into a bag as if neatness could shield me. I learned from her that quiet people can be brave in ways no one claps for. At my apartment, I changed out of the dress and into a sweater that had held its shape for years. I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote 3 short lines at the top pledge letter. Board minutes, donor acknowledgement policy. Under that, I wrote a 4th press release draft with final approval stamps. I opened my laptop, found the email from the foundation's coordinator, and sent a polite request for copies of the signed pledge and the donor policy sections that define restricted versus unrestricted. I asked for the exact time the wire had landed and the time the public announcement went live, because timing tells a story paper won't say out loud. I kept the sentences spare. I thanked them for their work that night, because gratitude opens more doors than volume. Before bed, I saved the MC script as a PDF, then printed it and circled the phrase unrestricted pledge with a pencil. I dated the circle. I placed the page in a folder with a clipping from an old campus newsletter, a photo of me at 22 holding a scholarship certificate with my last name printed without his. It steadied me to see the same letters on a piece of paper that had nothing to do with him. Morning came with the soft sound of the neighbor's kettle through the wall. I made coffee and opened my inbox. The coordinator had already replied, absolutely attaching the pledge letter and donor policy. The gift is classified as unrestricted, once accepted and announced. Our policy does not allow post hoc restrictions or withdrawal for branding control. Wire confirmation attached. There were 3 PDFs. I printed them and placed them in a neat stack on the table, aligning the corners with my fingertips, the way I align ingredients when I cook. The pledge letter was simple and formal. It said the amount, the purpose to support first-generation student access, and a line that mattered more than the rest. This is an unrestricted pledge. The foundation shall have sole discretion over allocation within the designated program scope. The donor signature block bore my father's name. The date matched the wire confirmation accepted and recorded the morning of the gala. At the bottom, the foundation officer's signature looked exactly like the way she writes her R's on sticky notes that say, "Call me if you need anything." I read the donor policy twice, moving a ruler down the page to keep my place. Section 4. 3 defined an unrestricted pledge and what it allows. Section 5. 2 said that once the gift is accepted and publicly announced, the donor cannot impose new conditions as a term of continuation. It mentioned exceptions for misrepresentation and illegality. Neither applied here. I underlined 2 sentences lightly, just enough to find them again without bleeding through the paper. I set my pen down and drew a small box in the margin labeled Sequence. Under it, I wrote 4 times in order: 1 wire arrival, 2 pledge acceptance, 3 public announcement, 4 father's restricted claim. The order mattered. It said that his word now was pressure, not policy. At mid-morning, the coordinator called. Her voice had a crisp edge, the kind you hear when someone has slept too little and plans to be gentle anyway. "I wanted to give you a heads up," she said. "Donor Relations will likely convene a short committee Q&A this week. It's standard when a major donor's PR team pushes for clarification. Will my presence be needed? I asked. They'll invite you to provide context. She said, you don't have to speak if you prefer not to. We have documents. I will attend. I said. After we hung up, Lydia sent me a message. Come by for lunch. I have something. I walked the 10 minutes to her porch where the wind played with the fern fronds that never die on her watch. She set a plate of chicken salad and sliced pears on the table and pushed a folded printout across the placemat. It was an old email forward from my father's assistant to a marketing firm. Dated years ago during a hospital capital campaign. The line that mattered was simple. No free publicity, unless my client's name is first and exclusive. It was the same voice I heard last night. The same shape his pride always took when it was hungry. I folded the printout once. Then again. And placed it inside the folder, with the pledge letter. Lydia poured tea and waited until the steam thinned. You don't have to punish him, she said. You just have to hold a mirror. I know, I said. The policy will do the rest. The afternoon stretched clean. I made a list for the committee Q&A. Not a speech, just short. Clear sentences I could say without heat. Define restricted versus unrestricted in plain words. Confirm the timeline. Explain that the program's purpose does not change with his mood. State that I will not accept any naming that makes students feel indebted to a man who despises them for needing help. I wrote that last line and then crossed it out because it was about feeling, not procedure. I replaced it with scholarship. Branding should honor the community served, not a single ego. It said the same thing without inviting a fight. Toward evening, my phone buzzed with a news alert from a local blog that thrives on the crumbs of other people's lives. The headline said I had returned to the family well, and that reconciliation was sweet. I felt my mouth go dry. I did not read the comments. I forwarded the link to the Foundation's communications lead with a single sentence. Please advise on best practice for no comment posture. She replied in 5 minutes with a template. We're grateful for the generosity of all our supporters. As with all gifts, the Foundation adheres to its policies. We have no further comment at this time. I saved the sentence and promised myself I would not improvise. When the sun slipped behind the low roofs across the street, I put on a coat and walked around the block twice. A boy on a bicycle steered carefully around a pothole. A woman in a blue cardigan set 2 bowls of water on a stoop for the cat that patrols the hedges. The world, for a moment, had nothing to do with gifts or grudges. At home, I placed my folder inside a larger binder, added a page with my contact information printed clearly, and made one more copy of everything for the quiet drawer where I keep birth certificates, leases, and the letter my freshman advisor wrote when I had no one else to list as an emergency contact. Before sleep, I said a prayer that was more like a list for the students who would use this money to buy bus passes and textbooks and good shoes, for the staff who would have to sit through a meeting where a man with a loud voice tried to change the rules because the rules didn't serve him, for my mother, who learned to keep her breath shallow when my father was near, and for me, to do the next right thing without wasting words on the wrong fight. In the morning, I would answer the committee's email, confirm my attendance, and walk into a room where the microphones make small clicks when they wake. I would bring my binder. I would speak only when asked, and if he said the word restricted again, I would hand them the paper that named his word for what it was, not policy, not law, just a habit of control he mistook for truth. The Foundation's message arrived Monday morning, polite and trimmed of emotion. Donor Relations Committee will meet Wednesday at 10 a.m. to clarify communications related to the recent pledge. Attendance optionnelle. Optional meant expected. I marked the time in my planner, printed the agenda, and slid it into my folder with the other documents. The email had no subject line drama, only a small attached note from the coordinator. We'll have coffee ready. You've handled this with such grace. Grace, I thought, was the word people used when they wanted you to stay quiet. By Tuesday, the story had grown. A journalist from a local business magazine called, saying he wanted a quote about the touching father-daughter reconciliation. He said the foundation had declined to comment. I told him I had no statement, and that the facts were already public. He pressed, asking if the donation meant the family had put old wounds to rest. His tone suggested he already had a headline waiting. I thanked him and hung up. Then I typed a message to the Foundation's communications director, media request, received declined comment per policy. For your information. She replied with a thumbs-up emoji, which felt like solidarity in shorthand. That night, I printed another copy of the donor policy and highlighted the sentence about irrevocable gifts. Lydia called as I was sliding it into my binder. "You'll need to bring calm more than facts," she said. "Men like him lose louder than they win." "I'm not trying to win," I said. "I just want it documented." "Then you're already ahead," she said, and hung up. The committee met in the small conference room on the top floor of the Foundation building, with glass walls that turn the city into a quiet aquarium outside. There were nameplates at every seat. My father sat opposite me, flanked by his counsel. He wore a navy suit, and the kind of expression that could double as indifference or disdain. The chair of the committee, a woman in her 60s with a soft gray bob, opened the session. "We're here," she said, "to confirm the intent and terms of the pledge agreement and to ensure transparency in our communications." She nodded to the development officer beside her. "Please summarize." The officer read evenly from a brief document. The donor's pledge, received and wired on the day of the gala, was classified and publicly announced as unrestricted. The Foundation accepted it under that definition. Subsequent inquiries have suggested a possible misunderstanding of the term. She looked up. "We've invited both parties to clarify their understanding." My father's lawyer adjusted his papers. "Mr. Harlan wishes to note," he said, "that his intent was for the funds to support a specific program and to carry an acknowledgement of the family's contribution." The chair's pen hovered above her notebook. "Intent is often appreciated," she said, "but the binding terms are in the signed document. Would you like to elaborate?" "Mr. Harlan." My father's voice was smooth, confident. "The pledge was never meant to be open-ended," he said. "It was restricted from the start, to ensure that the funds would reflect proper stewardship, and not," he glanced at me, "personal agendas." The chair turned a page. "You used the word restricted. May I read directly from the document?" She lifted the pledge letter and read aloud. "This is an unrestricted pledge. The Foundation shall have sole discretion over allocation within the designated program scope." She looked up again. "This line appears above your signature. Dated and confirmed by wire transfer that morning." For the first time, his face tightened. "That's boilerplate," he said. "The expectation was always understood. Then we'll need evidence of that expectation," the chair said. His lawyer cleared his throat. There were verbal discussions with staff prior to the signing. The development officer flipped through her binder. "All pre-signing correspondence is attached in Appendix A," she said. "There are no conditions or revisions noted. We also have a voicemail transcript confirming the term unrestricted before the event." She placed the sheet on the table. My father's counsel leaned forward, but my father spoke before him. "Look, the point isn't the paperwork," he said. "The point is control. My company doesn't write checks without knowing where the money goes." The word control settled in the air like a pin drop. The chair's brow lifted slightly. "Mr. Harlan," she said. "Once the pledge was wired and publicly accepted, control transferred to the Foundation. That's the definition of an unrestricted gift." He pressed his lips into a hard line. "Then you misled me." The development officer opened another folder. Respectfully, Sire, the MC's script, reviewed and approved by your communications director. Described the pledge exactly as unrestricted. We have her sign-off timestamped 2 hours before the gala. Silence followed. I watched his lawyer glance toward him, then lower his eyes. It was the kind of silence that comes when the room collectively realizes the story has just rewritten itself. The chair tapped her pen lightly. We have sufficient clarity. The pledge remains unrestricted and irrevocable. Any attempt to alter its terms would contravene both the agreement and foundation policy. She looked at me. Would you like to add anything? I shook my head. No. Ma'am, the documents speak clearly. She smiled faintly. Indeed they do. After the meeting, as we stepped into the elevator, Lydia's text arrived. He just admitted the word himself. Didn't he? I replied. Yes. Control was his own witness. At the lobby, I paused by the donor wall, a long panel of engraved glass that caught the sunlight in silver letters. My father's name wasn't there yet. The foundation never adds new donors until final confirmation paperwork clears. It might never clear now. I ran a finger along the blank space where it would have gone and felt, for the first time in years, that absence could be a form of protection. That afternoon, the Foundation's PR office released a short statement. The pledge announced at last week's gala will be administered per standard policy as an unrestricted gift to support student access initiatives. It was 10 words shorter than the draft I'd seen days before. But its simplicity carried more weight than any press conference could. At home, I took the signed letter and placed it in the same folder as the MC's script. Then I added a note in pencil at the bottom of the page. Self-destruction complete, he confessed on record. I wasn't sure who I was, writing it for my future self. Or perhaps the quiet satisfaction of closing a loop that had been open since I was 19. The phone rang again that evening. It was my mother. Her voice was cautious, as though she were testing a bridge before crossing. You made him look small, she said. I didn't make him anything, I said. He brought his own mirror. She sighed. He's furious. He's consistent. Then, I suppose, she said softly. You sound calm. I'm tired, I answered. That's the same thing for now. There was a pause long enough to fit a lifetime of unsaid things. You know he'll rewrite this story, she said finally. I know, I said, but the paper won't. I hung up, walked to the window, and looked out at the city where small lights moved between larger shadows. In another office somewhere, a clerk would file today's minutes and lock them into the Foundation's archive, where words like control and unrestricted would sit side by side forever, telling anyone who cared to read exactly what had happened. On the desk beside me, Lydia's earlier words echoed, use anger slow. I smiled faintly. Slow was winning. The morning after the committee's decision, the news cycle flipped. The same outlets that had praised a reunion now ran headlines about a donor dispute, quoting the Foundation's statement word for word. I didn't read the comment sections. The silence of the Foundation's phones was the loudest proof that the process had worked. A week later, the board announced a new initiative. The pledge money would be divided into 40 small scholarships for students who had aged out of foster care. I reread the statement twice, tracing every line until it felt real. They had removed my father's company name from the program entirely. The fund would carry no surname, only a title, the Open Door Scholarship. At home, I folded the statement into my binder behind the other documents. Lydia arrived that evening with takeout and a bottle of ginger ale. She looked around the apartment and smiled at the piles of papers sorted into labeled folders. Looks like closure, she said. Almost, I said. There's one more thing. I handed her an envelope addressed to the Foundation. Inside was a letter authorizing the release of my original honorarium, small compared to the gift to seed an emergency grant for students facing eviction or unpaid fees. If he used money to control, I said, I'll use mine to free. Lydia's eyes softened. Your grandfather would have liked that. I think he would have liked that it's quiet, I said. That night, I reread the minutes from the committee session. The phrase, unrestricted pledge, appeared 7 times. Control appeared once. In his quote, those 2 words, unrestricted and control, summed up the 18 years between the door closing behind me at 19 and the moment I watched his argument fall apart under its own weight. 2 weeks later, I returned to the Foundation for a small reception introducing the new scholarship. The air smelled of paper and lemon polish. Students stood in small clusters near the refreshment table, holding identical folders stamped with the foundation seal. The chair from the committee greeted me with a handshake. "Thank you for showing patience," she said. "Integrity sometimes looks like stillness." One of the scholarship recipients approached, a young woman with short hair and the same guarded posture I'd once carried. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "This means I don't have to drop out this semester." "It's the foundation you should thank," I said. "They built the path." She smiled. "Then thank you for standing on it first." As I drove home that night, the sky over the city was the soft gray of unpolished metal. I passed my father's corporate tower, its logo still lit. Indifferent to the small corrections that can tilt a story toward truth, I didn't feel triumph. I felt something cleaner, a space where anger had been. At home, I placed the final letter in my binder and closed it. I wrote one last note on the inside cover: "Justice isn't a shout, it's a record." Then I slid the binder onto the shelf between textbooks and tax returns. Ordinary company for something extraordinary. When the following spring arrived, I received an invitation to speak at the scholarship dinner. The coordinator's email was simple: "We'd love a few words about what this program means to you." I stood at the podium that night before a smaller, quieter crowd. The students sat in borrowed suits, hands folded carefully over their programs. I was once told that control keeps things safe. I began, but safety built on control only lasts until someone asks a question. Tonight, you are the questions alive. Persistent and unafraid. Applause rose like a low wave. Steady, not loud. Afterward, as the room emptied, I saw a familiar figure at the far door, my mother, standing alone. She didn't approach, and I didn't wave. She simply nodded once. An acknowledgement that some stories can only end in distance. Outside, I walked to the lake and let the wind lift the edge of my notes. The night air smelled of rain and lilacs from the park below. I whispered the same prayer I had written months ago. Now shorter, may the work last longer than the pain that started it. At home, I turned off the lights, the binder resting on the desk like a completed equation. There was no need to reopen it. The story was no longer mine alone. It had moved on, carrying others with it. I'd like, share, and subscribe for more true-to-life stories about resilience, justice, and quiet strength. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story that restores faith in truth and perseverance. Subscribe for more heartfelt, real-life inspired dramas about family, loss, and redemption. End.